The gunshot echoed across the vast Wyoming plains as Lillian Dawson clutched her husband's blood-soaked shirt, watching helplessly as the light faded from his eyes. "Stay with me, Thomas," she begged, but the bullet had found its mark, and her world collapsed under the endless western sky of 1871. "Indians?" Thomas gasped, his final word before death claimed him. Though Lillian knew it had been white men who attacked their wagon outlaws who'd taken everything but spared her life by some cruel mercy. Now, miles from anywhere with a broken wagon wheel, limited supplies, and her husband's body growing cold beside her, 23-year-old Lillian faced the merciless frontier alone. Night descended like a shroud over the rolling prairie. Lillian had managed to drag Thomas's body beneath the broken wagon and covered him with their quilt. Her hands were raw from digging at the hard earth with only a cooking pot, attempting to create a grave worthy of the man she'd followed west from Boston. They'd been married barely 2 years, chasing Thomas's dream of land and opportunity in Wyoming Territory. Mourning brought no comfort, only the harsh reality that she needed to bury her husband and somehow survive. The outlaws had taken their horses, most of their food, and Thomas's rifle, leaving Lillian with little more than the clothes on her back and whatever meager supplies they deemed worthless. "I don't know what to do, Thomas," she whispered, kneeling beside his makeshift shroud. Her honey-blonde hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in tangled strands around her dirt-streaked face. "I don't know how to get home. I don't even know where home is anymore." The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent terror coursing through her veins. She scrambled for any weapon, finding only a small kitchen knife, which she clutched with trembling hands as she pressed herself against the wagon, praying for invisibility. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the rising sun. Tall and broad-shouldered atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, he approached with the casual confidence of a man who knew the land beneath him, like his own heartbeat. As he drew closer, Lillian could make out the details. Worn leather chaps, a dusty Stetson pulled low, and a rifle resting easily across his saddle. "Hello, the wagon," the rider called out, stopping a respectful distance away. "Anyone alive?" Lillian remained frozen, the knife clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "I mean no harm, madam," he continued, his voice deep and steady. "Saw the wagon from the ridge, thought someone might need help." Something in his tone, perhaps the genuine concern or the lack of threat, gave Lillian the courage to step out from her hiding place, though she kept the knife visible. "My husband," she said, her voice cracking from thirst and grief. "He's dead, outlaws." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. He might have been 30, though the frontier aged men quickly. "Zachary Blackwood," he introduced himself, keeping his distance out of respect for her fear. "Most folks call me Zach, Lillian Dawson," she replied, lowering the knife slightly but not relinquishing it. His eyes moved to the shape beneath the wagon, understanding immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Dawson. No one should meet their end out here like this." "They took everything," Lillian said, embarrassed by the tears that sprang unbidden to her eyes. "Our horses, supplies. I can't even dig him a proper grave." Zach studied the situation, taking in the broken wagon, the disturbed earth where Lillian had attempted to dig, and the vulnerable woman standing before him with more courage than many men he'd known. "First things first," he said decisively. "Your husband deserves a proper burial." "Then we need to get you somewhere safe." He gestured to the vast emptiness surrounding them. "Nearest town is Fort Laramie, about 40 miles east. I've got a ranch 20 miles west of here." "I don't even know where I am," Lillian admitted, the enormity of her situation crashing down upon her. "You're on Clayton Pass," Zach informed her. "Main trail between Cheyenne and the Northern Territories." He paused. "Mrs. Dawson, I know you've got no reason to trust me, but you can't stay here. Once I help you bury your husband, I'd like to take you to my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is there. You'd be safe until you decide what you want to do." Lillian stared at this stranger, weighing her limited options. Stay and certainly die, or trust this cowboy and possibly live. I have a shovel on my pack, he added gently, and I can say some words if you'd like. Fresh tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks, but she nodded her acceptance. Zach worked steadily through the morning heat, digging a grave deep enough to protect Thomas from scavengers. Lillian gathered wildflowers and arranged them on the rough pine box Zach had constructed from parts of the broken wagon. When the time came, they lowered Thomas into the earth together. "Would you like to say something?" Zach asked, standing respectfully with his hat held against his chest. Lillian knelt beside the grave. "Thomas Dawson was a good man with dreams bigger than Boston could hold. He promised me adventure and a new life." Her voice broke. "I didn't know it would end so soon. I hope you find peace, my love." Zach stepped forward. "Lord, we commit this man to your keeping. Guide his soul home and watch over those he's left behind." His simple prayer carried across the windswept plains, and Lillian found unexpected comfort in the words of this stranger. After the last shovelful of dirt was patted into place and a crude cross made from wagon parts was secured, Zach turned to Lillian. "We should go before nightfall. It's not safe here." Lillian gazed at the fresh mound of earth. Everything we owned was in that wagon. "Is there anything salvageable?" Zach asked practically. They scavenged what they could: a family Bible, a few cooking utensils, a small trunk containing Lillian's clothing that the outlaws had deemed worthless. Zach tied these to his saddle, then turned to Lillian. "I'm afraid we'll have to ride double," he said. "Chester here is strong enough to carry us both to the ranch." Lillian hesitated only briefly before nodding. What choice did she have? Zach mounted first, then reached down to help her up. His hand was calloused but gentle as he pulled her up behind him. "You'll need to hold on to me," he instructed. "The trail gets rough in places." Tentatively, Lillian placed her hands on his waist, feeling the solid strength of him through his cotton shirt. As they began to move, the rhythmic sway of the horse forced her to grip tighter, and she found herself pressed against his back, an intimacy that would have scandalized her Boston acquaintances. They rode in silence for the first hour, Lillian lost in grief and uncertainty while Zach focused on the trail. Finally, he spoke over his shoulder. "You said outlaws attacked you. Did you get a look at them?" "3 men, Lillian answered, her voice hollow. One had a scar across his face. They wore bandanas, but I could see the scar. Thomas tried to fight them off when they demanded our money, but..." She couldn't continue. Zach nodded grimly. "Sounds like the Riker gang. They've been terrorizing travelers in these parts for months. You know them?" Lillian asked, a flicker of anger cutting through her grief. "Every rancher and lawman in the territory knows them," Zach replied. "Sheriffs had a bounty on them since they killed a family near Cheyenne last spring. And no one's caught them." The bitterness in Lillian's voice was palpable. "Territory's vast, Mrs. Dawson. Easy for men like that to disappear," he paused. "But they'll meet justice someday. Men like that always do." The sun was beginning to set when they crested a hill, revealing a valley below. A modest ranch house with a barn and corral sat nestled against a backdrop of pines, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. "Blackwood Ranch," Zach announced. "Not much compared to what you might be used to in Boston, but it's home." As they approached, Lillian could see chickens pecking in the yard and cattle grazing in the distance. A small vegetable garden flourished beside the house, and flowers bloomed in window boxes. It was humble but clearly cared for with pride. An older Chinese woman emerged from the house as they rode into the yard, her face registering surprise at the sight of Lillian. "Mrs. Chen," Zach called as he dismounted. "We have a guest in need of our help." He turned to assist Lillian, his strong hands spanning her waist as he lifted her down from the horse. Her legs, unaccustomed to riding, nearly buckled beneath her, and Zach steadied her with a supportive arm. "Mrs. Lillian Dawson," he introduced. "Her wagon was attacked on Clayton Pass." "Her husband didn't make it." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with understanding. "Come inside, Mrs. Dawson. You need food and rest." Lillian allowed herself to be led into the house, too exhausted and overwhelmed to do anything else. The interior was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, wooden furniture gleamed with polish, and colorful quilts added warmth to the rustic space. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Chen urged, guiding Lillian to a chair at the kitchen table. "I make tea." Zach entered a moment later, having seen to his horse. "Mrs. Chen makes the best biscuits in Wyoming Territory," he said, attempting to lighten the mood, "and her stew will put meat on your bones." "You're very kind," Lillian murmured, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Both of you." "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need for talk of payment," Zach said firmly. "Out here we help each other. It's the only way to survive." Over a simple but hearty meal, Lillian learned that Zach had established his ranch 5 years earlier after working as a trail guide and sometimes bounty hunter. Mrs. Chen had been with him for 3 years, after Zach had helped her son escape trouble in a mining camp. The son now worked in San Francisco, sending money home regularly. "My room clean for guest," Mrs. Chen announced when Lillian could barely keep her eyes open. "I sleep in kitchen, very comfortable." "I couldn't possibly," Lillian began to protest. "Please," the older woman insisted. "You need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Lillian followed Mrs. Chen to a small but neat bedroom. A copper tub sat in the corner, steam rising invitingly. "Bath first," Mrs. Chen declared. "Then sleep." After the older woman left, Lillian sank into the hot water, letting it wash away the dirt and tears of the past terrible days. As she scrubbed her skin raw, she finally allowed herself to fully comprehend what had happened. Thomas was gone. She was alone in a strange territory, dependent on the kindness of a man she'd just met. What would become of her now? She had no family back east, no money, no skills beyond those of a Boston society wife. The future stretched before her, vast and terrifying as the Wyoming prairie itself. Later, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Lillian crawled between clean sheets and surrendered to exhaustion. Her last conscious thought a prayer of gratitude for the stranger who had carried her to safety. Zach sat on his porch long after the house had gone dark, smoking a cigarette and contemplating the unexpected turn of events. Mrs. Dawson was clearly a woman of breeding and education, not the type to end up on a frontier ranch. Her grief was raw, her situation desperate. He'd seen it before. The frontier broke many women who came west with their husbands' dreams. Yet there was something about Lillian Dawson that suggested strength beneath her fragile exterior. The way she'd stood her ground with nothing but a kitchen knife, the dignity with which she'd buried her husband, the lack of hysteria in the face of overwhelming tragedy. Zach knew he should ride to Fort Laramie tomorrow, inform the sheriff about the attack, and see about arranging passage east for Mrs. Dawson. It was the proper thing to do, yet something made him hesitate. The territory was still dangerous, especially for a woman alone. Perhaps it would be better if she stayed at the ranch a while longer, at least until she recovered her strength. With that rationalization, Zach crushed out his cigarette and headed to the barn, where he'd arranged a makeshift bed for himself. As he drifted off to sleep, the image of honey-blonde hair and grief-stricken green eyes followed him into his dreams. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee. Lillian woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was and reaching for Thomas before reality crashed back. She lay still, gathering her courage before facing the day and whatever it might bring. The simple dress Mrs. Chen had laid out for her was faded but clean, and though slightly large, it was infinitely better than her filthy traveling clothes. After dressing and attempting to tame her hair into some semblance of order, Lillian made her way to the kitchen. Zach and Mrs. Chen were already at the table, but both stood when she entered. "Mrs. Dawson," Zach greeted her, "I hope you slept well." "Better than I had any right to," Lillian admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Sit, eat," Mrs. Chen urged, placing a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. "Too thin, needs strength." Despite her lingering grief, Lillian found she was ravenous. As she ate, Zach outlined his plans for the day. "I need to ride into town to notify the sheriff about what happened," he explained. "I should also send telegrams if there's anyone you'd like contacted." Lillian shook her head. "There's no one. My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. I have a distant cousin in Philadelphia, but we haven't spoken in years." Zach studied her thoughtfully. "What were your plans before?" "Thomas had purchased land near Sheridan," Lillian explained. "We were going to build a home, start a new life." Her voice caught. "He was an architect, had such beautiful plans drawn up." "I'm sorry," Zach said quietly. "If you'd like, I can inquire about transportation back east when I'm in town. The stagecoach comes through Fort Laramie twice a month." The thought of returning east filled Lillian with unexpected dread. What would she return to? No family, no home, no prospects. At least Thomas had had a dream that had carried them west. I'm not sure what I want to do," she admitted. "Everything has happened so quickly." "There's no rush to decide," Zach assured her. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to sort things out." "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," he interrupted. "The ranch is quiet this time of year. My foreman and the hands are up in the north pasture moving cattle." "Won't be back for a couple of weeks." "Stay," Mrs. Chen added firmly. "Good to have another woman here." Gratitude washed over Lillian. "Thank you, perhaps just until I can make proper arrangements." After breakfast, Zach prepared to leave for town. "I should be back by nightfall," he told Lillian. "Mrs. Chen will look after you. Stay close to the house. Even though we're remote, strangers sometimes pass through." Lillian nodded, suddenly fearful at the thought of Zach leaving, even temporarily. He must have read her expression because his next words were reassuring. "There's a shotgun in the cupboard by the door. Mrs. Chen knows how to use it, though she hasn't had to in years." He smiled slightly. "Most folks know better than to cause trouble at Blackwood Ranch." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Lillian to wonder what kind of reputation her rescuer had that kept trouble at bay. The day passed slowly. Mrs. Chen put Lillian to work snapping beans from the garden, explaining that idle hands made grief sharper. There was wisdom in the older woman's approach, and Lillian found the simple task soothing. "Mr. Zach, good man," Mrs. Chen said as they worked side by side. "Saved many people, saved me and my son." "He seems very kind," Lillian agreed cautiously. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look. "Not just kind. Strong, fair, respected." She paused her work. "His wife died 5 years ago, childbirth, baby too." The revelation startled Lillian. "I didn't realize he'd been married. He not talk about it, too painful." Mrs. Chen resumed her work. "But good man deserves happiness." Lillian wasn't sure how to respond to this apparent matchmaking, so she changed the subject. "How did you come to work for Mr. Blackwood, Mrs.?" Chen's story emerged gradually, how she'd come from China to join her husband who worked building the Transcontinental Railroad, how he'd died in a blasting accident, how she and her son had struggled to survive in mining camps where prejudice against Chinese was rampant. When her son was falsely accused of theft, Zach had intervened, proving his innocence and then offering Mrs. Chen a position at his ranch. "He say I cook better than him," she finished with a small smile. "Truth is, he save us, I owe him everything." By the time Zach returned that evening, Lillian had gained a new perspective on the quiet cowboy. He wasn't just a good Samaritan who'd helped a stranger in distress. He was a man with his own history of loss who consistently extended himself for others. "Sheriff wasn't in town," Zach reported over dinner. "His deputy took my statement and promised they'd increase patrols along Clayton Pass for whatever that's worth." "Did you learn anything about the Riker gang?" Lillian asked. "Only that they hit a supply wagon 2 days before they found you," Zach replied grimly. "No survivors that time." Lillian shuddered, realizing how lucky she'd been to escape with her life. "Why did they spare me?" Zach's expression darkened. "I can't say for certain. Sometimes they leave witnesses to spread fear. Or, he hesitated, or they might return," Lillian finished softly, understanding his reluctance. "It's unlikely they'd come here," Zach assured her quickly. As I said, the ranch has a certain reputation. But it's another reason why you should stay, at least for now. You'd be safer here than traveling or in town. The following days established a routine. Lillian helped Mrs. Chen with household tasks, gradually learning the rhythms of ranch life. Zach was often out from dawn until dusk, tending to cattle, mending fences, and handling the 1,000 tasks required to keep the ranch operational. Despite her initial discomfort at being dependent on strangers, Lillian found herself settling in. The simple life had an honesty to it that she found appealing after the artifice of Boston society. Here, worth was measured in work and character rather than family connections and social standing. A week after her arrival, Zach found Lillian sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. "May I join you?" he asked, and at her nod settled into the chair beside her. "It's beautiful here," Lillian said softly. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful in its own way. It grows on you," Zach agreed. "I came west planning to make my fortune and return east, somehow never got around to leaving. You're from the east originally, Pennsylvania. My father owned a lumber mill." He stretched his long legs out before him. "I was supposed to take over the business, but after the war I couldn't settle back into that life." "You fought in the war?" Lillian asked, suddenly realizing how little she knew about this man who had saved her. "Union cavalry," Zach confirmed. "Saw things no man should see. When it was over, the walls of my father's house seemed to close in on me. I needed open sky and room to breathe." Lillian understood that feeling all too well. After her parents' deaths, the Boston house where she'd grown up had felt suffocating with memories. It was one reason she'd agreed so readily to Thomas's plan to go west. "What about you?" Zach asked. "What brought a Boston lady to Wyoming Territory?" "Thomas's dreams," she answered honestly, "and perhaps my own restlessness. After my parents died, there was nothing keeping me in Boston except convention, and Thomas offered adventure." She smiled sadly. "He was very persuasive when he wanted to be." "He must have been a remarkable man to win you," Zach said quietly. The compliment brought a flush to Lillian's cheeks. "We had a good marriage, brief though it was. He was kind and ambitious." She sighed. "I just wish I'd had the chance to say goodbye properly." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, more stars than Lillian had ever seen in Boston's light-polluted skies. "Mrs. Chen tells me you were married once," Lillian said finally, unsure if she was overstepping but curious about this enigmatic man. Zach was quiet for so long that Lillian feared she had indeed intruded too far. Just as she was about to apologize, he spoke. Her name was Sarah. "We grew up together in the same town, married young before I went off to war." His voice was steady but distant, as if recalling a story that had happened to someone else. "When I came back, we decided to head west together. She was excited about the adventure, much like you and your Thomas." He paused and Lillian waited, sensing there was more to come. "We'd been here about a year when she got pregnant. The nearest doctor was in Fort Laramie and I was away when her time came early. Mrs. Chen did what she could, but..." He shook his head. "I built this ranch for her. Sometimes I wonder why I stay, but I can't seem to leave it." "Because it was your dream together," Lillian suggested softly. "Leaving would feel like abandoning that last connection." Zach looked at her with surprise, as if she'd articulated something he'd never been able to put into words. "Yes," he said simply. "That's exactly it." In that moment of shared understanding, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both loved and lost, who both understood that grief was the price of having dared to love deeply. The following morning, Zach surprised Lillian by asking if she'd like to ride out with him to check the south pasture. "I've never ridden alone," she admitted. "Thomas and I always rode in the wagon." "I have a gentle mare that would suit you," Zach offered, "and I can teach you the basics. Might be a useful skill for you to have out here." The prospect was both frightening and exhilarating. "I'd like that," Lillian decided, After breakfast, Zach led her to the barn where he introduced her to Daisy, a placid brown mare with kind eyes. He showed Lillian how to saddle the horse, his hands occasionally guiding hers in the unfamiliar tasks, each brief touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. "The main thing is to relax," Zach advised as he helped her mount. "Daisy will sense if you're nervous. Trust her and she'll take care of you." Lillian gripped the saddle horn tightly as the mare shifted beneath her, but gradually, as they began to walk around the corral, she found her balance and her confidence grew. "That's it," Zach encouraged, walking alongside. "You're a natural, Mrs. Dawson." "Please," she said impulsively, "call me Lillian. After all we've been through, Mrs. Dawson seems unnecessarily formal." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Lillian it is, then, and I'm Zach, not Mr. Blackwood." By the time they set out for the south pasture, Lillian had mastered the basics of controlling Daisy with gentle pressure from her knees and subtle shifts of the reins. Zach rode beside her on Chester, occasionally offering advice, but mostly letting her find her own rhythm. The day was glorious, the Wyoming summer at its finest, with blue skies stretching endlessly overhead and wildflowers dotting the prairie. As they crested a hill, Zach pointed to a herd of antelope in the distance, their tan and white forms blending with the landscape. "Beautiful," Lillian breathed, enchanted by the grace of the wild creatures. "This land has a beauty like nowhere else," Zach said. "Harsh sometimes, but honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not." They rode for miles, checking fences and water sources, Zach explaining the operations of the ranch as they went. Lillian found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about cattle management and the seasonal rhythms of ranch life. By midday, they stopped by a small creek for lunch. Zach spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree while Lillian unpacked the food Mrs. Chen had prepared for them: cold chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. "Your housekeeper seems determined to fatten me up," Lillian observed as she laid out the generous meal. Zach laughed. "Mrs. Chen believes food is the solution to most of life's problems. Can't say I disagree with her." As they ate, Lillian found herself relaxing in Zach's company in a way she hadn't with anyone since Thomas died. There was something steady and reassuring about him, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured, emboldened by the ease between them. "You can ask. I might not answer," he replied with a slight smile. "Why haven't you remarried?" "It's been 5 years, and surely there must be women in the territory who would." "Who would have me?" Zach finished wryly. "There aren't many unmarried women out here, and those who are tend to prefer the merchants and bankers who stay clean and sleep in proper beds every night." "That's not what I meant," Lillian protested. "You're a successful rancher, respected in the community. Mrs. Chen speaks very highly of you." "Does she now?" Zach looked amused. "She's been trying to marry me off for years. Brought her niece from San Francisco last summer, but the poor girl took one look at the ranch and was on the next stage back to civilization." "Not everyone appreciates the beauty of this place," Lillian said, gesturing to the sweeping landscape around them. "No," Zach agreed, his eyes studying her with new interest. "Not everyone does." After lunch, they continued their ride, eventually circling back toward the ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened. By the time they returned, Lillian was saddle-sore but exhilarated by her newfound skill and the day spent in the open air. "You did well for your first ride," Zach complimented her as he helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment after her feet touched the ground, he didn't step back, and Lillian found herself looking up into his blue eyes, suddenly aware of his closeness and the strange flutter in her chest. The moment was broken by Mrs. Chen calling from the porch that supper was ready. Zach stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get cleaned up," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. That night, lying in bed, Lillian found herself confused by her reactions to Zach. It had only been 2 weeks since Thomas died, far too soon for her to be noticing another man's eyes or the strength of his hands. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt to the quiet rancher who had saved her life and opened his home to her. Was it merely gratitude and the vulnerability of her situation? Or was it something more, something that made her feel both guilty and alive in a way she hadn't expected to feel again? Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with these thoughts, eventually drifting off just before dawn to dreams of riding across endless prairies with a tall figure by her side. The next morning, Lillian woke to raised voices. Throwing on her dress, she hurried to the kitchen where she found Zach in heated conversation with a man she didn't recognize, tall and official looking in a dusty suit. "Mrs. Dawson," Zach said when he noticed her, his expression tense. "This is Marshal Dawson from Fort Laramie." The marshal removed his hat, revealing graying hair and a weathered face. "Madam, I understand you're the widow who was attacked on Clayton Pass." "Yes," Lillian confirmed, immediately on guard. "Has something happened? We've been tracking the Riker gang," the marshal explained. "Found evidence they've been hiding out in an abandoned mining camp about 20 miles north of here. I'm gathering men for a posse and came to ask for Mr. Blackwood's help. You want Zach to join a manhunt for outlaws." Lillian couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. "Mr. Blackwood has a certain reputation with a rifle," the marshal said, "and he knows the territory better than most." Lillian looked at Zach, who met her gaze steadily. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," he told her. "But those men killed your husband, Lillian. They've killed others. Someone needs to stop them. And that someone has to be you," she challenged, surprised by the intensity of her fear for him. "I rode with marshals before," Zach said. "I know what I'm doing." The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "We're gathering at Fort Laramie tomorrow at dawn. Expect to be gone 3, maybe 4 days." He placed his hat back on his head. "Think about it, Blackwood, we could use you." With a nod to Lillian, he took his leave. "You're considering this," Lillian said once they were alone, not a question but an accusation. "I am," Zach admitted. "Those men are dangerous. The longer they're free, the more people will die. And if you die chasing them, what then?" The words burst from her before she could stop them. Something flickered in Zach's eyes, surprise perhaps at her vehemence. "Would it matter to you if I did?" he asked quietly. Lillian faltered, caught off guard by the directness of his question and the emotions it stirred. "Of course it would matter," she finally said. "You saved my life. I owe you everything." "Is that all?" His voice was soft, probing. I don't know what you want me to say," Lillian stammered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Zach stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I want you to say what you feel, not what you think you should feel." "It's too soon," Lillian whispered, both an answer and a plea for understanding. "Thomas has been gone barely 2 weeks. I don't know what I feel about anything right now." Zach nodded, accepting her honesty. "Fair enough. But know this, Lillian, I'm not riding with the marshal for glory or vengeance. I'm riding because it's the right thing to do and because I want you to be safe. As long as those men are out there, you won't be." His words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully address. Finally, Lillian nodded. "Then be careful and come back safely." "I intend to," Zach promised. The remainder of the day passed in tense preparation. Zach cleaned his rifle and packed supplies while Lillian and Mrs. Chen prepared extra food for his journey. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken concerns and emotions too new and fragile to be examined in the light of day. That evening, as Zach sat on the porch cleaning his revolver, Lillian joined him with 2 cups of coffee. "I brought you this," she said, handing him one. "Thank you." He set aside the gun and accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "I wanted to apologize for earlier," Lillian said, sitting beside him. "It wasn't my place to question your decision to ride with the marshal." "You have every right to your opinion," Zach replied. "And to be honest, it's been a long time since anyone cared whether I rode out or not." The simple admission tugged at Lillian's heart. "Mrs. Chen cares," she pointed out. "Mrs. Chen worries about everyone," Zach said with a slight smile. "It's her nature." Well, I care too, Lillian said softly, even if it's complicated. Zach studied her face in the fading light. Life out here is often complicated, Lillian. Doesn't make feelings any less real. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, each lost in their own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring and what the future held beyond that. Dawn broke cold and clear the next morning. Lillian rose early, finding Zach already in the kitchen drinking coffee while Mrs. Chen packed the last of his provisions. "You're up early," he observed. "I wanted to see you off," Lillian replied simply. After a hasty breakfast, Zach donned his coat and gun belt, then checked his rifle one last time before slinging it into its saddle holster. Outside, Chester stamped impatiently, breath fogging in the chilly morning air. "I should be back in 3 days, 4 at most," Zach told Mrs. Chen, who nodded stoically though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Be careful," the older woman admonished. "No heroics." "Yes, madam," Zach agreed with a small smile, then turned to Lillian. "The ranch hands should be back from the north pasture tomorrow. You'll be safe here." "It's not me I'm worried about," Lillian said. For a moment, Zach looked as if he might say more, but instead he simply nodded. "Take care of each other," he said, and then he was mounting Chester and riding away, a solitary figure disappearing into the golden light of dawn. The next 2 days dragged endlessly for Lillian. She threw herself into ranch work alongside Mrs. Chen, helping with laundry, canning vegetables from the garden, and even learning to make bread under the older woman's patient instruction. Physical exhaustion was preferable to the constant worry that plagued her thoughts. As Zach had predicted, the ranch hands returned from the north pasture, 4 weather-beaten men who tipped their hats respectfully to Lillian and spoke to her only when necessary. Their presence should have been reassuring, but Lillian found herself counting the hours until Zach's return. On the evening of the 3rd day, Mrs. Chen prepared Zach's favorite meal, beef stew and apple pie, only to have it grow cold as darkness fell with no sign of him. Lillian paced the porch until well past midnight, straining her eyes for any movement on the moonlit prairie. "He will come," Mrs. Chen assured her as they finally retired for the night. "Mr. Zach always comes back, but he didn't come the next day or the next. By the 5th day, even Mrs. Chen's stoic confidence was shaken and Lillian could no longer contain her fear. "I'm riding to Fort Laramie," she announced over breakfast. "Something's wrong. Too dangerous," Mrs. Chen protested. "Wait another day." "I can't wait anymore," Lillian insisted. "I'll take Daisy, I know the way." After a heated discussion, they compromised Lillian would ride to Fort Laramie, but Jake, the most experienced of the ranch hands, would accompany her. They set out mid-morning, Lillian now comfortable enough on horseback to maintain a steady pace despite her anxiety. The town of Fort Laramie bustled with activity when they arrived, not the normal kind of commerce, but the urgent movement of people with purpose. Something had happened. Lillian and Jake made their way to the marshal's office, where a deputy greeted them with harried impatience until Lillian introduced herself. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, his demeanor instantly changing. "We've been hoping you'd come to town. There's news about the posse." Lillian's heart seemed to stop. "What news? Is Mr. Blackwood all right?" "The posse found the Riker gang, madam. There was a shootout." The deputy hesitated. 3 of the outlaws were killed, including Riker himself, but we had casualties too. Marshal Dawson was wounded and 2 of the posse were killed. "And Zach," Lillian could barely force the name past her lips. "Mr. Blackwood was shot," the deputy said gravely. "He's at Doc Wilson's place, been there 3 days now, in and out of consciousness." Lillian was moving before he finished speaking, rushing out the door with Jake close behind. The doctor's office was at the far end of the main street, a small whitewashed building with a sign proclaiming G. Wilson, M.D. A bell jangled as Lillian burst through the door, startling a gray-haired man who looked up from his desk with irritation that quickly turned to interest. "You must be Mrs. Dawson," he said, rising. "Mr. Blackwood's been asking for you in his more lucid moments. How is he?" Lillian demanded, her composure cracking. Holding his own, Dr. Wilson replied. Took a bullet to the shoulder and another grazed his side, lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. If infection doesn't set in, he should recover. May I see him? The doctor nodded. Through there. Try not to excite him. He needs rest more than anything. Lillian entered the small room, her eyes taking a moment to adjust to the dimness. Zach lay on a narrow bed, his normally tan face pale against the white sheets. His shoulder was heavily bandaged, and even in sleep, lines of pain creased his forehead. Moving quietly, Lillian sat in the chair beside the bed, gently taking Zach's hand in hers. His skin was too hot, and her fear spiked. He's running a fever, she said when the doctor checked on them a few minutes later. Yes, Dr. Wilson acknowledged. Started this morning. I've been giving him willow bark tea, but it's a fight now between his strength and the infection. What can I do? Lillian asked. Stay with him. Talk to him. Sometimes hearing a familiar voice can anchor a patient. The doctor paused. And pray if you're so inclined. For the next 2 days, Lillian barely left Zach's side. She bathed his burning forehead with cool cloths, spooned broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and talked to him endlessly about everything and nothing memories of Boston. Stories Mrs. Chen had told her about the ranch, plans for the garden she wanted to plant in the spring. In his fevered state, Zach sometimes called her Sarah, and Lillian would gently correct him, reminding him who she was and where they were. Other times, he would grip her hand with surprising strength and make her promise not to leave. I'm not going anywhere, she would assure him, and mean it with a depth that surprised her. On the 3rd night, Zach's fever broke. Lillian, dozing in the chair beside him, woke to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear for the first time in days. You're here, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Of course I'm here, Lillian replied, blinking back tears of relief. Where else would I be? Thought I dreamed you, Zach admitted. Kept hearing your voice but couldn't be sure what was real. I'm real, she assured him, squeezing his hand, and you're going to be fine. The doctor says the worst is over. Zach managed a weak smile. Did we get them, the gang? Yes, Lillian confirmed. Riker and 2 others are dead, the 4th was captured, the marshal was wounded but will recover. Good, Zach murmured, clearly struggling to stay awake. That's good. Rest now, Lillian urged, smoothing his hair back from his forehead in a gesture that felt both intimate and natural. We can talk more later. Zach's recovery progressed steadily after that night. Within a week, he was strong enough to sit up and take real food, though the doctor insisted he remain in town for at least another week before attempting the journey back to the ranch. Lillian took a room at the town's small hotel, visiting Zach daily and gradually helping him regain his strength through short walks and longer conversations. They talked of many things: his experiences during the war, her childhood in Boston, books they had read, dreams they had held. In these quiet conversations, something deepened between them, a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued, beyond the artifice of proper behavior and societal expectations. They were simply a man and a woman who had each suffered loss and found in each other the possibility of renewal. The doctor says I can travel back to the ranch tomorrow, Zach announced one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the doctor's office, enjoying the late summer sunshine. Are you sure you're strong enough? Lillian asked, studying his face for signs of fatigue. Strong enough to sit a horse, Zach confirmed. Besides, I've been away too long. The ranch needs attention before winter comes. Mrs. Chen will be relieved, Lillian said. She's been worried sick about you. Jake's been riding out every few days with updates. And you? Zach asked quietly. Will you be coming back to the ranch as well? The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Lillian had been avoiding thoughts of the future, focusing instead on Zach's recovery. But now the time had come to decide. I've been thinking about that, she said slowly. The stage to Cheyenne leaves next week. From there, I could take the train east. Zach's expression remained carefully neutral. Is that what you want? It's what would be expected, Lillian replied honestly. a widow returning to civilization after tragedy. "I didn't ask what's expected," Zach said. "I asked what you want." Lillian looked out at the dusty street, the simple wooden buildings, the vast sky overhead. "I'm not sure I know anymore. When Thomas died, all our plans died with him. I've been adrift ever since." "You could make new plans," Zach suggested softly. "Here." The implication was clear, but Lillian needed more than implication. "Are you asking me to stay, Zach?" He met her gaze directly. "Yes, I'm asking you to stay, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because I think you belong here." "With the ranch, with me?" "People would talk," Lillian said, though it was a weak objection and they both knew it. "It's too soon after Thomas." "Let them talk," Zach replied with a shrug. "Out here, people judge you by your actions, not by some arbitrary timetable of propriety." He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not asking for promises, Lillian, just time for you to be sure of what you want, time for us to know each other better." Lillian looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, her smaller but no longer as soft as they had been when she left Boston. The Wyoming sun and wind had begun to leave their mark on her, just as this man and this place had marked her heart. "I'll stay," she said finally, looking up to meet his gaze. "At least through the winter, and then we'll see." The smile that lit Zach's face was worth any scandal their arrangement might cause. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "A chance." They returned to the ranch the next day, traveling slowly to accommodate Zach's healing wounds. Mrs. Chen greeted them with uncharacteristic emotion, actually embracing Zach before scolding him for his recklessness. Life settled into a new rhythm as autumn approached. Zach regained his strength gradually, at first limited to light duties around the ranch house before eventually returning to his full responsibilities. Lillian continued to help Mrs. Chen with household tasks, but also began to learn more about the operations of the ranch, riding out with Zach when he was well enough to check on the cattle and learning the boundaries of the property. As the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Lillian found herself reflecting on the strange path that had brought her to this place. 6 months ago, she had been a proper Boston wife embarking on an adventure west with her architect husband. Now she was a widow living on a Wyoming cattle ranch, learning to ride and shoot, helping birth calves, and falling slowly but inexorably in love with a man as different from Thomas as the rugged mountains were from Boston's manicured gardens. The realization didn't shock her as it once might have. Instead, it settled into her consciousness with the rightness of something long known but only now acknowledged. She loved Zach Blackwood, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, his deep understanding of the land and its rhythms. She loved the life they were building day by day, without promises or declarations, but with a steadfast commitment to the present moment. Winter came early that year, harsh and unforgiving. Snow piled in drifts around the ranch house, and the temperature dropped to bitter cold that made outdoor work brief and brutal. The cattle were brought to the closest pastures for easier feeding, and the ranch hands moved into the bunkhouse full-time rather than making the dangerous journey to town. During those long winter evenings, the ranch house became a haven of warmth and companionship. Mrs. Chen taught Lillian to make dumplings and told stories of her childhood in China. Zach read aloud from dog-eared books by the firelight Dickens, and Twain and occasionally poetry that surprised Lillian with its tenderness. Sometimes the ranch hands would join them, bringing guitars and harmonicas for impromptu music that filled the house with life and laughter. Through it all, Lillian's feelings for Zach deepened, though neither spoke openly of what was growing between them. There were moments a lingering touch when he helped her from her horse, a gaze held too long across the dinner table, a conversation that continued late into the night after Mrs. Chen had retired that told her he felt the same. But he kept his promise to give her time, never pressing for more than she was ready to give. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories of holidays past and the bittersweet awareness that this would be Lillian's first Christmas without Thomas. Zach seemed to sense her melancholy and went out of his way to make the season special, returning from a supply run to Fort Laramie with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle and a mysterious package he refused to let her see. On Christmas Eve, after a feast prepared by Mrs. Chen that somehow managed to include traditional dishes from both American and Chinese celebrations, Zach presented Lillian with the package. "It's not much," he said almost shyly, "but I wanted you to have something." Unwrapping the brown paper, Lillian found a leather-bound journal with her initials stamped in gold on the cover, along with a fountain pen of polished wood. "You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal in Boston," Zach explained. "Thought you might want to start again. Write down your thoughts about this new life." Touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, Lillian impulsively leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." Later that night, after Mrs. Chen had gone to bed, Lillian and Zach sat before the fire, the ranch house quiet except for the crackle of burning logs and the occasional moan of wind around the eaves. "Are you happy here, Lillian?" Zach asked suddenly. "Truly happy," Lillian considered the question seriously. "I am," she answered finally. "Not in the way I expected to be when Thomas and I set out west, but yes, I'm happy. This place, this life, it suits me in ways I never imagined." "And us?" Zach pressed, his voice low. "What about us?" Lillian met his gaze steadily. "I think you know how I feel, Zach." "I want to hear you say it," he insisted gently. "No more implications or assumptions, just the truth between us." Taking a deep breath, Lillian crossed the invisible line they'd been circling for months. "I love you," she said simply. "I didn't expect to love anyone after Thomas, certainly not so soon, but I do love you and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." Relief and joy transformed Zach's face. "I've loved you since that day we rode to the South pasture," he admitted. "Maybe even before that. But I didn't want to rush you, didn't want you to feel obligated because of what happened on Clayton Pass." "It's not obligation," Lillian assured him. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man you are." Zach reached for her then, drawing her gently into his arms. "I want to marry you, Lillian," he said against her hair. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday I want to build a life with you here." Lillian leaned back to look into his face, seeing there everything she needed to know about his character and his heart. "I don't need to wait," she told him. "I know what I want, and it's you. It's this life we've already begun building together." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, Lillian saw in Zach's eyes the same wonder she felt, the recognition that something precious and unexpected had been given to them both. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, but when it arrived, it brought a renewal that matched the rebirth happening in Lillian's heart. The ranch bloomed with wildflowers, calves frolicked in the green pastures, and preparations began for Lillian and Zach's wedding. They were married on a perfect May afternoon beneath the cottonwood tree where they had shared their first meal together nearly a year before. The ceremony was simple, just the ranch hands, a few neighbors, and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Fort Laramie. Mrs. Chen wept openly, having come to love Lillian as the daughter she never had. As Zach slipped a simple gold band onto Lillian's finger, she reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. Thomas's death had seemed like the end of all her hopes and dreams, yet it had ultimately led her to a happiness deeper and more authentic than anything she had known before. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," Zach whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "And I love you, Mr. Blackwood," Lillian replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss her new husband as their assembled friends cheered. Later that evening, as they danced beneath the stars to the music of Jake's fiddle, Lillian rested her head against Zach's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Happy?" he asked, his lips against her hair. "Completely," she assured him. "Though I can't help thinking about how we met, such terrible circumstances that somehow led to this perfect happiness." "Life has a way of surprising us," Zach observed. When I found you on Clayton Pass that day, I was just doing what needed to be done. I never imagined I was meeting my future wife. When you carried me home on your horse, Lillian mused, I was so lost in grief I couldn't see a future at all. Now I can't imagine any future without you. As the celebration continued around them, Zach led Lillian away from the dancing, out to the porch where they could see the vast Wyoming sky ablaze with stars. I've been thinking, he said, his arm around her waist. That land near Sheridan that Thomas bought, we could look into claiming it. Build that house he designed if you still have the plans. Not to live in, he added quickly, but as a kind of memorial. A way to honor what he wanted to create here. Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes at the generosity of the suggestion. You would do that? I would, Zach confirmed. Thomas was part of your journey here. I don't want to erase that. Lillian considered the offer, then slowly shook her head. It's a beautiful thought, but I don't think it's necessary. Thomas lives in my memories, but my future is here with you. This ranch is our home. Zach smiled, drawing her closer. Our home, he repeated. I like the sound of that. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, cattle in the pastures, crops beginning to sprout in the fields, the barn and bunkhouse and main house that had become the center of their shared life. A year ago, Lillian had been a Boston society wife with no knowledge of ranching or the harsh realities of frontier life. Now she was a rancher's wife, capable of riding for hours, helping birth a calf, or shooting well enough to put food on the table. The transformation amazed her, yet it felt entirely natural, as if she had finally found the person she was always meant to be. What are you thinking? Zach asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I'm thinking that sometimes the end of one dream makes room for another, better one to take root, Lillian replied. And I'm grateful for this land, for this life, for you. Zach turned to face her fully, framing her face between his hands with infinite tenderness. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing this path, he promised. This land, this ranch, it's part of me. Now you're part of me too, Lillian, the best part. As their lips met in a kiss that sealed their vows more surely than any ceremony could, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of a man who had carried her safely through grief to love. 5 years later, Lillian stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Zach taught their 4-year-old son Joseph to ride his first pony while 2-year-old Sarah toddled after them, determined not to be left out. Mrs. Chen called from the kitchen that dinner was ready, her voice now showing signs of age but her spirit as strong as ever. The Blackwood Ranch had prospered under their combined care. The herd had doubled. New lands had been purchased, and the original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Lillian now managed the ranch accounts and correspondence, putting her Boston education to practical use, while Zach handled the day-to-day operations with a steadily increasing crew of loyal hands. Life wasn't always easy. The Wyoming winters remained brutal. Droughts sometimes threatened the cattle, and the isolation could be wearing, but it was a good life, rich with purpose and love. Lillian had found strength within herself she never knew existed, and a capacity for happiness that sometimes took her breath away. As Zach scooped up both children and headed toward the house, his smile as he caught sight of Lillian was as warm as it had been on their wedding day. She went to meet her family, reflecting that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures if one had the courage to keep moving forward. Her husband had died on the trail, but another man had carried her home on his horse, not just to a physical place, but to the home she had found in his heart. And in that journey from devastating loss to profound joy, Lillian had discovered the most important lesson of the frontier. That true strength came not from never falling, but from rising again after life had knocked you down and finding the courage to love once more.